Good afternoon once again, everyone. We know more people are joining us, but we are going to go ahead and start the webinar. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Labor for Palestine Canada to this webinar, Resisting Imperialism and Israel's War and Occupation of Lebanon. My name is Hassan Husseini. I'm a member of the National Steering Committee of Labor for Palestine Canada, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I want to just run through a few logistics and ground rules of the webinar. First of all, this will be a recorded webinar, and eventually we will edit it slightly and post it on our Labor for Palestine YouTube channel. Please note that the chat function between participants will be deactivated for this event so we can focus on the speakers themselves. We are inviting you to use the questions and answers function at the bottom of your screen to pose any questions you may have for our speakers or to flag any technical issues you may encounter. Feel free to post your questions at any time. I would like to start by acknowledging that the land on which we gather across the country is the territory of many indigenous nations and peoples. As union members and allies, we are committed to struggling for equality for all peoples, from so-called North America to occupied Palestine. Our recognition of the centrality of indigenous struggle is clearly and overtly linked to our collective commitment to undo capitalism, colonialism at home and abroad, and to continually pursue and make real the calls for action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission right here in Turtle Island, or the part of Turtle Island called Canada. As many of you know, Labor for Palestine Canada answered the call of 2005 from Palestinian unions and other mass democratic organizations in support of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, BDS. Since we were refounded in 2017, we have worked to deepen labor and worker solidarity in Canada with the just struggle of the Palestinian people for liberation from apartheid, settler colonization, and illegal occupation. Over the past 2.5 years, we have been part of a global movement to stop the genocide in Gaza and across Palestine. We have also stood firmly in solidarity with the people of Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Iran as they faced imperialist and Zionist aggression and war, with the tacit as well as explicit support of the Canadian state. As organizers and trade unionists, we have experienced many advances and some setbacks in our unions. We know from history that through our collective labor power, we can be a key part of an internationalist movement to isolate Israel by declaring all goods, services, and relationships with Israel as hot cargo, not to be touched by workers of conscience. This webinar, of course, is on the urgent and developing situation in Lebanon. It is intended to provide an overview of Israel's aggression against Lebanon, to say the least, aggression against Lebanon, dating back to 1948 and even before, and the resistance, of course, of the Lebanese people over the years. Notwithstanding the 10-day ceasefire that began yesterday morning, which has already been violated by Israel multiple times, Israel's brutal war against Lebanon has so far killed 2,294 and injured 7,544 between March 2nd and yesterday. In addition to the destruction of thousands of homes, schools, daycare centers, healthcare facilities, bridges, and other civilian infrastructure, all in an attempt by the Zionist entity backed by US imperialism and reactionary Arab regimes to defeat and disarm the resistance and ethnically cleanse South Lebanon. We're very pleased today to have two great speakers with us, Hisham Safieddine and Nathaniel George. Hisham Safieddine is a Canada Research Chair in the History of the Modern Middle East and Associate Professor of History at the University of British Columbia. He is author of Banking on the State, The Financial Foundations of Lebanon, editor of Arab Marxism and National Liberation, selected writings of Mahdi, Amel, and co-editor of the Clarion of Syria, a patriot's call against the civil war of 1860. Nathaniel George is lecturer in the politics of the Middle East at SOAS University of London. He is a global political historian of the modern Arab world and United States foreign relations. His research and teaching focus is on the relationship between revolution, counter-revolution, sectarianism, and empire. Prior to joining SOAS, he was a Raphael Morrison Dorman Memorial Postdoctoral Fellow at Harvard University's Weatherhead Center for International Affairs and the Ibrahim Abu Lughod Fellow at Columbia University Center for Palestine Studies. It is my honor to welcome both our speakers. We will start with Nate first, and then we will go to Hicham, and right after that, we will open the floor for questions and answers. Of course, as we said, the question and answer function is available for you at the bottom of your screen. You can pose your questions at any time during the presentations. Nathaniel, we'll go over to you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm actually just trying to set up my screen sharing. One moment, but it's an honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Hassan and Labor for Palestine. You have to do one thing. Sorry, it's a new computer. I have to actually quit and rejoin. Is that okay? Or should I just forget about it?
You have to quit and rejoin so you're able to share?
I have to rejoin the meeting. Yes. Sorry
if you want to share the slides maybe with one of us, we could share for you.
Okay. 1 second. Where will I send it, in the chat?
Yeah, maybe the chat.
It's coming. There you go.
Are you able to share it if you received it?
You didn't receive it? Have you seen it?
Yeah, I have it. Just one second.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
We'll probably just use the first couple slides too.
Okay, you all can see it? Okay.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. My apologies for that. I wanted to bring it back a little bit further than 1948 and to start here. And I think it started here with the foundation of the Lebanese state and the Mashriqi state system, basically, which just goes back to over 100 years. Because what is going on right now, this idea of remaking a new Middle East yet again, is harkening back so many ways to the formation of these states and the role that they played in imperialism 100 years ago. So when we prior to 1920, like the rest of the Mashriq or the Arab East, the area of contemporary Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and Iraq was a region of the Ottoman Empire, which was a multi-religious, multilingual, multinational empire, an Islamic empire that ruled for 600 years prior to its defeat in the First World War by Imperial Britain, France, and the Allies. And when the societies that succeeded the Ottoman Empire were immediately colonized by Britain and France. And so Lebanon and Syria go to become mandated to Lebanon and Syria are mandated to the French, and then Palestine, Jordan, Iraq mandated to the British below that. So then you have this unified territory being broken up into two different imperial realms and into many different states in between it. And South Lebanon, which was part of one unified region under Ottoman sovereignty, became the fault lines of a divide between French and British control. And in addition to that, Zionist colonization, because the British, with the Balfour Declaration, allowed the Zionists to set up a settler colonial state in their mandate region. And what the French did in Syria and Lebanon was not even to just create these two states that we know today. They created 6 states, each with a predominant sectarian coloring. Greater Lebanon, as it was called, was explicitly designed to be a polity in which Christians would dominate dominate the political system over others. Then you had the state of Syria that was divided into a Druze state in the southern area around Sweda, which we've seen the battles today and the reigniting of the Israeli project to resurrect sort of a Druze entity. You had the state of Damascus and Aleppo. These were the ideas of this would be Sunni states that couldn't be united because then it would be too many people. Too many people united against the imperial power. So they divided Aleppo and Damascus from each other. And they created an Alawite state around Latakia in the western Syrian, along the eastern Mediterranean, just north of Lebanon, that purple place there. And then the Sanjak of Alexandretta. So the idea of dividing and ruling is endemic to the rule of to imperialism in the region and its Zionist ally, basically. And this really set the tone, and this imperial rule was contested from the very beginning by many communities, not just on a sectarian basis, but on a national basis. There was a independent Syrian kingdom that was founded at the same time that was suppressed by the French, and that suppression took place through Lebanese territory. And again, empires using bases and positions, links to suppress popular sovereignty, basically, that we're seeing. And what was significant about Lebanon, why it's still such a deeply divided society today, is that there was strong support within the society from various sectors, and most notably Maronite Christians who were empowered by the French mandate that were in support of a Lebanon that would be tied to France. So the real dividing line in Lebanese politics, rather than being Christian or Muslim as it's normally thought of, should really be thought of as those who are pro-colonial or philo-colonial, as we call it, or anti-colonial, that were opposed to the imperial powers and also the Zionist movement. This is when you look at all the different parties and alignments across Lebanese history. The sectarian groups might change. The different parties that support the philo-colonial line or the anti-colonial line, the alliances might change, but what doesn't change? So people, it's not strictly, let's say, left or right, for instance, because There are some leftists that ended up, or people who describe themselves as leftists, as supporting, that end up supporting imperial or colonial rule, like the many that are calling for Lebanese state primacy today against resistance, for instance. So this is the big picture. And if we could just go to the next slide, or excuse, back one more, sorry. Back, that's good. And a couple more points here is that these separate sectarian states were also ruled under one French colonial economy. So this is like the classic, for me, the divide between a sectarian political superstructure imposed upon one area that was ruled as one economy by the imperialists, but was separated by religion and by political power. So this had long-lasting effects, and Syria resisted this. Make a long story short, they imposed unity through an anti-colonial revolts in the 1930s, whereas Lebanon never experienced a national liberation movement in the colonial period. And that's not how it won its independence, not through a liberation struggle, but through an elite deal. So this all has impacts on how the shape of the internal Lebanese conflict. And we can go to the next slide now. And these empires armed and trained various military units based on sectarian identity, as they're trying to do and resurrect now, especially in Syria, with arming Kurds, or Israel taking credit for arming Kurds and Druze, for instance, as protecting minorities. To complicate matters more than just the imperialists, you have the Zionists here, and here's a map of their claim of their settler colonial state that they made in 1919 at the Paris Peace Conference. And you can see it goes far up into Lebanon, all the way to near Saida. It goes into the Golan, which they eventually took over in 1967, over the Jordan River into Jordanian territory, all of Palestine, not just the place that would be allotted to it by the UN, and into Egypt. So this is the project for a greater Israel that has been there since the beginning, from even quite mainstream leaders, labor Zionists like Ben-Gurion. So I wanted to put this all in the big picture. I know it's a lot. And what the Zionists wanted throughout this time was they needed to dominate the region in order to enforce this monolithic Jewish state in what had been a very heterogeneous, and what is a very heterogeneous region of many religions and peoples. And in order to do that, they need to not only suppress resistance in Palestine, but prevent any resistance from generating on its borders as well. And from the beginning, Lebanon, Syria, and the surrounding states had been involved in resistance against Israel. The leadership of the Arab Army, Arab Rescue Army in 1948 was a Lebanese from Tripoli, Fawzi al-Kawukji, a former Ottoman soldier, for instance. Izzeddin al-Qassam, famous for the namesake of the Qassam brigades of Hamas, came from Syria, south into Palestine. So the region had been very supportive, of course. And with the Nakba, you have the loss of Palestine. Obviously, many Palestinians being pushed into Lebanon, totally dispossessed refugees who become stigmatized by the ruling class in the society. They're seen in the majority as being a Muslim population, and the minority of Christians, which added to the sectarian and political dynamics in Lebanon that would continue to divide the rule today. And you have Lebanon itself, its educational institutions, its cities, its workers' movement become merged with the Palestinian struggle in the 1950s and 60s. And with the rise of the Palestinian Revolution, the 60s, the PLO, Fatah, the Popular Front, the Democratic Front, these groups, many of which were even founded, like the Arab Nationalist Movement was founded in Beirut by Arabs of many different Arab nationalities especially surrounding the American University of Beirut, George Habash, Wadi Haddad, etc. And all those branches of that movement turned into Arab revolutionary movements in Yemen, for instance, Dhofar, and Belang, and beyond. So in the 60s, you have this rise of the Palestinian mobilization that was then found ideal guerrilla territory in southern Lebanon, which is a mountainous region overlooking the low valleys of occupied Palestine, and formed the villagers there that had been far from central authority, either from the Ottoman Central Authority or the Lebanese State Central Authority, and were marginalized by that state, which is only focused on developing really the capital city to the exclusion of the rural regions, and being dominated by a Christian elite overwhelmingly. The power, the president had to be a Christian, for instance. The commander of the army had to be Christian. The commander of all the army units, military intelligence, all the subunits were Maronite Christians, for instance. So you had this tight locus of identity, which is really about a position in a political structure that merged with the struggle for Palestine. So the people that wanted change in Lebanon, allied with the Palestinian Revolution, student movements, the labor movements in the 1960s, in the era of socialism. This was all seen as one united struggle to liberate the Arab world, basically, the rise of Arab nationalism and revolutionary anti-colonial regimes. So this scared the Lebanese elites and many members of society that were invested in the existing structure. And this is what led to the Lebanese civil war. And you had the Lebanese national movement, the left-wing alliance, aligning with the Palestinians to create the resistance in southern Lebanon. And they were building armed resistance primarily as a means of challenging Israeli occupation. Whereas the Lebanese right then began arming against the resistance forces, basically the Lebanese and the Palestinians. And they were afraid of the idea of a transformation in the system. So this became such a powerful movement in the 1970s that the Civil War could be best characterized as a counter-revolution against a emerging popular revolutionary movement of Lebanese and Palestinians for change in Lebanon and in the region. Like the popular dates that seen as starting the war are either in February or April 1975 is when you have right-wing militias either attacking prominent leftist leaders like Maruf Saad and killing them in Saida, or attacking and committing a massacre of Palestinians in the capital in April 13th. That's famously the start of the war. So it was really a right-wing offensive against this anti-colonial revolutionary movement that was building in the country. And that power called in challenge was, of course, of concern to Israel. And Israel had wanted and coveted for instance, the control of resources in southern Lebanon, the Litani River, which they're always talking about as a geographic boundary for their new buffer zone, their new area of ethnic cleansing, basically, in Lebanon. They need energy resources. They need resources for themselves. I mean, the Litani River is not a significant geographical barrier, but one side or the other is not going to it's not the Nile we're talking about here. It's a very small river. It's not a natural geographic boundary. So it's hard to justify based on geography alone. So this emergence of a popular anti-colonial movement is what drew in multiple Israeli invasions and constant Israeli support for counter-revolutionary right-wing, in many cases Christian nationalist parties throughout the Civil War. And you had invasions in 78, an occupation that began in with that invasion from the Litani River, south of the Litani River, that lasted until 2000, until liberation. You had a bigger invasion in 1982 in which the PLO was ultimately ejected, and half the country was occupied. That was pushed back by resistance successfully in 1985. You had a peace treaty that was imposed on Lebanon in 1983 by the Americans and the Israelis that was overthrown in a popular, few years of popular resistance that had grown up and had said no to this horrible agreement. I think Hicham will be talking about the parallels between the 1983 agreement and normalization, basically treaty, that was eventually even the Lebanese state had to retreat from. And throughout the 90s, you had in late 80s, you had a change of the guard in terms of the leadership of the resistance from the Lebanese national movement forces, especially the secular left, the Lebanese Communist Party, and the Palestinian organizations, as the wider revolutionary socialist movement died out in the end of history period. We're talking about the fall of the Soviet Union. There was also major wind was taken out of the sails, and you also had the Iranian Revolution that took place in '79 and became an alternative frame of reference for revolutionary anti-colonialism, which had a strong appeal, especially to the Shiite population in Lebanon, which is the predominant population of the South, the predominant population that experienced Israeli occupation and ethnic cleansing by Lebanese forces, especially Christian forces, Christian nationalist, sectarian parties had attacked that community a lot as well, and the community was assigned the least amount of power in the Lebanese system. So it's no surprise that the opposition to the existing Lebanese political order and the regional political order would come from the margins of society geographically and their place in the political system. So I think I've gone beyond my time there, but this is the big picture of imperialism, Zionism, and how identity is weaponized for colonial ends, and how people on the ground in Lebanon, in the region, have mobilized under various ideological banners, whether under Communist Party banners, under Palestinian Revolutionary Nationalist banners, secular Lebanese nationalism, or now Islamic resistance and anti-colonial Islamic resistance. What is constant here is the constant intervention of empire and the Zionist settler movement in order to dominate the political society of Lebanon. With that, I think we'll have a lot of questions, which I'll be happy to answer to go into more detail. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Nate, for the presentation. Now we'll go to Hicham, who is joining us from Lebanon.
Good afternoon or evening. Good afternoon on your end, everyone. I want to thank you, Hassan, and I want to thank Labor for Palestine for organizing this event. I have a bit of a text on my right. If you see me looking right, I'm not being distracted by anything else. I'm also happy to be among comrades and some friends in Canada, even if virtually. And I welcome everyone else who's joining in as part of both trying to understand what's going on and as a form of solidarity. Now, I assume that most of you are aware of the ferociousness and the brutality of the current round of aggression that is waged by Israel against Lebanon since March 2. Hassan summed it up for us. We have more than 2,300 people killed, over 7,500 injured, over 1 million displaced. We also know that Israel has destroyed probably more than 40,000 housing units. That's almost 1,000 housing units a day. And these attacks have included residential homes, hospitals, schools, places of worship, heritage sites, makeshift street shelters of the displaced, cafes, restaurants, ambulances, buses carrying humanitarian aid, bridges and roads and other transport infrastructure. Now, those martyred include fighters, civilians, men, women, and children, journalists, paramedics. Sorry, I have to click on here. Paramedics, doctors, basically ordinary and working people of all stripes. And in order to cap all of this, Israel, on the first day of the ceasefire that was announced between Iran and the United States, conducted a blitzkrieg of 100 air raids in 10 minutes, indiscriminately killing almost 300 people. Now, if all of this sounds too familiar from the war on Gaza, that's because it is. And I think I'm building here on what Nate began, and this is us trying to understand the logic of imperialism and the counter logic of resistance and revolution, and how we can actually fight back against the incredible misinformation, the incredible machinery of manufacturing consent that is constantly barraged at us, and that can sometimes stop us perhaps from having a deeper understanding of what's going on, and I would argue continue to radicalize our struggle, because that's part of this counter-revolutionary movement, is to de-radicalize our position on what's going on. Now, what is happening in South Lebanon is indeed the genocidal logic that was applied to Gaza is now being applied to some extent to South Lebanon. And on this circulation and recirculation of imperialism in the region, we used to hear about the Dahi doctrine applied to Gaza, and now the Gaza doctrine applied to South Lebanon, because this is part and parcel of the same logic that has been unfolding in the region. Now, both imperialists and their reactionary allies on one hand, and the resistance forces on the other hand, are very much aware that the war in Lebanon is part of a single war on many fronts. So both camps actually know that. Its problem is with the people who are still either too liberal or not capable of realizing this reality. But because they are on opposite and contradictory positions, because they have opposing objectives, they express this unity of the battlefield in different manner. So what I'm going to do, just like Nate said, I'm happy to address any questions that you might have about what's happening right now, go into details. But I think, to me, I would like to talk about these two logics and how they apply to the Lebanese front today. So that's what I'm going to do, to how to frame what's going on. So in terms of the imperialist forces, they have several strategies that have been using in the last few years, and they're now applying in Lebanon. The first strategy is the material and moral destruction of any armed resistance by all means available. So the material destruction does not stop at the killing of resistance fighters and assets of resistance in the battlefield, but we have seen wholesale assassinations of resistance cadres who are not in combat, which is actually a violation of international law. We have also seen at the political level, the US and Israel, particularly in Lebanon, have tried to bring the Lebanese state back into the full orbit of American influence and creating a new satellite state. So this goes back to what Tate was talking about in the past. At some point, we are seeing this shift, because from 1990 until kind of 2005, the Lebanese state somewhat became, if not an ally, but a legitimator of resistance. And what we are seeing today is a shift back into this logic of an anti-resistance Lebanese state. So this is being used to criminalize resistance and delegitimate the right to resist. This has been expressed in government decrees, which we can talk about, and this has culminated in the direct negotiations that are held in Washington, and it has been expressed in the terms of the truce that was announced by Washington, which is a clear capitulation to Israeli demands, and actually is a case study of the surrender of sovereignty of a country undergoing foreign occupation. And we can do a comparative analysis if you want in the Q&A of past cases. Now, of course, the irony is that the surrender of sovereignty, the actual concrete surrender of sovereignty, is happening in tandem with a discourse of reaffirming state sovereignty. So we keep hearing all the time, the sovereignty, the Lebanese state wants to regain its sovereignty. And how is that happening? By claiming that the state wants to extend its authority across its territory. In Arabic, Basat Sultat al-Dawla, we keep hearing this discourse. When I go on any interview, the first question I ask, how come the state can't disarm Hezbollah? Not how can the state fight Israel or disarm Israel? So this idea of statist approach is being used at the discourse level while simultaneously being undermined at the concrete level. And those of you who know some political science theory, they can see that actually this is a Weberian emphasis, so the monopoly of violence within the territory, so the state acting as internal security, which is typical of colonial logics, whereas it's not actually a Westphalian sovereignty, which is a sovereignty against external threats. So it's a very narrow, particular understanding of sovereignty that is being weaponized to actually fight resistance in Lebanon today. Now, it's not only the state that's doing this, the media, the Western, the Gulf, and Lebanese mainstream media are playing a key role in pushing this logic. And this is part of the ideological battle that we are facing. And it is really intended to pull the plug from the social support that the resistance, because many people start somehow believing or thinking about this idea of sovereignty in a manner that is detrimental to actually liberating Lebanon from US imperialism and Zionism. Now, despite all these attempts to destroy the armed resistance, it has generally failed so far, despite actually, we'll talk about the losses. And so we have the second strategy. And when I say failed, I'm speaking about the trajectory that has kind of started in the 80s that Nate talks about all the way until today. And this is why in this last war, the Zionists and the Americans are somehow convinced that the only quotation marks remedy is to destroy the society of resistance. So we have armed resistance and we have the society of resistance, which people call the environment, but it's actually the society of resistance. So this is a destruction of an entire society. And this is why it's a people's resistance, by the way. That's why it's so hard to actually uproot. So this means that the logic of accumulation by dispossession, a long-standing logic of capitalism, is underway. We are seeing large-scale destruction and displacement with the emphasis on the border villages, of course, all under the pretext of creating a buffer zone, a security zone. We are seeing the systematic depopulation of these areas. And this is, of course, there's ample evidence now corroborated by the typical international organizations, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, which are no lovers of Hezbollah or the resistance. They are saying that this is ethnic cleansing. Now, of course, in addition to these dynamics of losing their land, so we have an actual dispossession of losing the land and the homes, we are seeing also other logics of free market, laissez-faire, that is escalating or exacerbating the conditions of the displaced. So rent prices are up the roof. There's actually a transfer of wealth, an actual transfer of wealth from the society of resistance taking place today to either opportunistic citizens who are charging incredible rates of rent, or to the monopolies of commodity sales through the market prices and other forms of further impoverishing the society of resistance. We also have a financial siege. We have financial sanctions. We have caps and surveillance on the amounts of money that the people can receive. We have had a cut of the ability to the mobility of people to go to also Iraq and Iran as a way of so-called tightening the noose. The Minister of Culture, Ghassan Salemi, rather than actually accelerate cultural resistance, is spending most of his time analyzing using his expertise in disarmament of what he calls this demobilizing, then reinsertion of the resistance into the state by advocating a siege on the resistance. So this is a form of blackmail that is taking place. Denying reconstruction has been a major instrument of trying to force people to disavow the resistance. So these are all forms of collective forms of denying or trying to actually push people to deny the resistance. Now we have a third strategy, which also builds on what has been discussed, which is sectarian division and incitement. So this is an old standing strategy. How is this playing out today on the ground? This idea that the Israelis are attacking the Shia. So this is the idea that if you host or house a Shia anywhere in the world, you're not safe. So this strategy, regardless if you're associated with Hezbollah or not. Now, this strategy is depicting the war as a war on the Shia. Now, it is in some respects, but we have to be very careful. It is precisely because the Shia constitute the main demography of resistance, and they happen to be geographically located in the south. And I always tell people, if the Shias disavow the resistance, my guess is the ambassador of the United States will go to Ashura the next day and celebrate Ashura with them. So this is also about the politics of this community at this conjunction, at this historical conjunction. And we have also seen actually the killing of Christian priests and the denial of the right of freedom of passage to remaining villages, Christian villages in the south, which generally are made invisible in the Western media in order to reinforce that this is a religious struggle, not a political struggle. We have an increased securitization and surveillance of societies in Lebanon. So we are witnessing this increase. So people have to tell on each other, which is a typical weapon of dictatorship and authoritarianism that they are so fond of telling us exists in our midst, where there are actually the imperialist forces are actually fomenting at an increasing rate. Not to mention, of course, the redirection of the Lebanese military towards internal security, and we can talk more also about the role of the military in this whole war. The fourth strategy, and perhaps the least obvious, but perhaps most dangerous, is the dissociation of the Lebanese front from other fronts, whether it's Palestine or Syria or Iraq or Iran or Yemen. Largely, the settler colonial project of Israel and its impact on surrounding countries is intertwined with global designs for gas extraction in the Mediterranean, for oil domination in the Arabo-Persian Gulf, and of course, after the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, with the entire chain of capitalist production, circulation, and consumption the globe over. So we have an intentional regional and global strategy of imperialism, of divide and conquer, of potentially, in one cases, destroying the state, but destroying the country, in others, uplifting the state based on whether the regime is anti or pro-colonial, based on whether it's in the interest of the imperialist forces to prop the state or to prop non-state actors like Al-Qaeda or Daesh versus undermine non-state actors like the resistance. So our understanding of capitalism and imperialism in the colonial setting, the contradictions there, the complications there, are not a footprint of what we understand standard forms of class struggle back in the global north. And we have to constantly remind ourselves, because we can sometimes easily fall into the trap, for instance, of calling for democratic change and regime change under good moralistic principles. But we know that these, when we apply them to the colonial context, are often instruments of undermining democratic forces, not actually supporting democratic forces. Now, I want to close on a note about the resistance, because they are fighting all of this. So it's not just, this emphasis on what the imperialists are doing. Firstly, despite the militarily superior, and not the morally, it's the morally, of course, the resistance is morally superior to the occupation. Despite the military superior and overwhelming firepower of the Israelis, the resistance is still fighting on the front lines. They are preventing, up to today, a large-scale invasion. So we're talking about an incursion of 5 to 10 kilometers max by this juggernaut, the Israeli army, being resisted by fighters on the ground, boots on the ground, with minimalist weaponry and with some semi-advanced rocket power. And so we see this incredible affirmation of resistance, and this reminds me of Mahdi Amel's a slogan: "You are not defeated as long as you resist." This doesn't, however, there's still a serious and present danger today of creating a buffer zone. So I don't want to undermine what's happening, and we can talk about that. But the point here is the death of the idea of resistance has been kind of suppressed after 15 months of the resistance abiding by a ceasefire and people thinking it's over. Also, the society of resistance has shown incredible strength and defiance. We see this constantly, just like in Gaza, people immediately trying to return to their home, to their land, when there's a ceasefire, even at the risk sometimes of facing tanks, of being killed. So we are seeing incredible defiance, sometimes driving through ravines to get back there. I have some friends that actually, the moment they heard of the ceasefire, they got in the car before midnight, and I told them, wait, maybe it's not safe in the morning, but said, no, we're not going to do that. Also, despite all the media highlight of many discriminatory practices, the majority of the Lebanese society everywhere in Lebanon have been generally very supportive. They have been hosting, and I can tell you, it's the working class people, it's the middle, these are the people who have this instinct of support. I go to the schools where when I hear the news, I get upset and frustrated, and I feel everybody hates everybody. Then I go to the school where the displaced are, and I see the incredible amount of generosity, of support, of hospitality, laborers, people, teachers, instructors working together. But it's not reflected in the mainstream media. So we cannot also overemphasize the success of this policy of discrimination. I think this is where the weakest link is. It's the media and the ideological battle. We are suffering a lot. It's also because of the selling out and the co-optation of most Arab intellectuals by Gulf capital. It's by the cowardice of many academics and many people who work in the West, who walk the walk, but talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. So we have a serious challenge to face in that respect. So if you count the odds stacked against the resistance, you will further appreciate the historical achievements and legendary sacrifices. But let's keep in mind, we literally have a single country, Iran, and 3 to 4 non-state actors fighting Israel and all the might of the US empire and its allies. This is why it is extremely important at this juncture that other forces, from China to South Africa to Brazil, to all anti-imperialist forces in the global north, to up their ante and stand in the face of this new fascist and recolonization tidal wave that we are witnessing around the world before it drowns all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Hicham and Nathaniel, for these two great and very informative presentations on the situation in Lebanon today, as well as historically. Questions are coming our way, and I, of course, would encourage folks online to put any questions they may have in the questions and answer section of the webinar at the bottom of your screen. Let me start with a question in relation to, as I'm listening to your presentations, I'm also monitoring the news that, of course, comes to me directly from sources in Lebanon, and what we are witnessing, and we have witnessed yesterday and today, is a violation, multiple violations of the ceasefire by Israel, including an escalation that we are witnessing today. And the resistance spokespeople have indicated that that people should be very careful and very wary to stay in South Lebanon, considering the usual deception of Israel when it comes to ceasefire. Can you elaborate? One of the questions is, can you elaborate on what it may mean for what happens next in the region that Israel keeps violating ceasefires all the time? So that's the first question. I'm going to ask you two more questions, and then you'll answer them between the both of you, and then we'll go to another set of questions. The second question is, how are they getting Lebanese people to tell on each other? I guess this is a question that goes to um, uh, potentially infiltration in Lebanon, where there are information being provided to the Israelis. How are they getting Lebanese people to tell on each other? It seems like a technique that was also used in wartime Germany. If somebody wants to elaborate on that. And perhaps a historical question I have here as well. Um, Now we're seeing a narrative about this is an Iranian instigated proxy war in Lebanon, including the Lebanese government engages in such rhetoric. Prior to 1979 and the victory of the Islamic Revolution in Iran and its support for the resistance movement that you both kind of alluded to and talked about directly, was there a different narrative blaming somebody else for the resistance? As someone who grew up there during that occupation of Lebanon, there was a different narrative. If one of you can elaborate on that, perhaps Nathaniel, that would be great.
Okay, shall I start, or do you want to?
Yeah,
go?
sure.
Okay.
If you want to go, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The first question, can you elaborate on what it means that Israel is violating ceasefires all the time? This is a great question. I think this is something very important to understand. What does Israel want today? What are the Zionists wanting today? They want to accept nothing less than functionally demilitarized states in Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Jordan, Egypt, and of course, prevent an establishment of a Palestinian state. What they want is to have a Palestinian Authority equivalent everywhere in the Arab world. And to take that back to the language of the type of older imperialism that I was speaking about in my contribution, this is what the British referred to when they colonized the Arab world in after the 1920s as the Arab facade. This was the term of Lord Curzon, who said, "This is how we're gonna do it. We're gonna put a Mohammedan." That's what he said in the original quote in the cabinet discussion, out front, well, to take the appearance to be the local police force, basically, and to execute our wishes while we firmly remain in control. So Israel's kind of they're trying to become a mandatory power, basically all around, to use the terms of the 1920s, to dominate everyone. And they want to enforce one-sided ceasefires where the other side is ceasing fire, and then they're allowed to fire whenever they want. And that is to really undermine international diplomacy. It undermines international law. I mean, they're doing genocide as a method. They're just deliberately destroying the means of social reproduction and the ability of a group to actually exist by attacking hospitals, schools, cultural centers, homes, elderly, women, children, non-combatants. They're trying to destroy the entire environment that could potentially resist. So the meaning of the violations of ceasefire is to impose their dominance and perform it on everyone, and to show that they can do what others can't, basically. Now, how are they getting Lebanese to tell on each other? So this is all the time. Like, this is the question of that goes back to collaboration and the power structures in these societies. And they create incentives for different classes of people, upwardly mobile people who have ties to, who are encouraged to see their lot as being bettered by throwing in their hopes, aspirations, and labor power and business, their capital into an alliance with the Gulf, with Israel, with the United States and Europe, basically. So they play one side off the other. They use all the means that Hisham talked about of sectarian incitement and othering, creating a structure of fear of fear of the other, which is ingrained in the Lebanese sectarian regime of political representation. The idea that every seat in the parliament has to be reserved for a particular group based on a quota that doesn't have any relation to the demographic weight of a community in power. The idea that Christians must have the presidency because if they don't, they will be automatically oppressed. That Sunnis have to have the prime ministry, and that because that's the most powerful office currently, because the riffraff in the countryside, the Shia and others, they create sectarian narratives around these positions in the power structure. I mean, sometimes people don't like to talk about the way that the power structure creates these sectarian ideologies, but that's exactly what it is designed to do: is to divide people and get them to see the other communities as a threat to each other. And finally, what the narrative before 1979, the Iranian Revolution, I mean, we're seeing the exact same rhetoric today, being the Nawaf Salam, the prime minister of Lebanon, is always bringing out in his speeches the war of others on our land. Harb al-akharin ala ardina. This is the Lebanese conservative ideology of the Lebanese civil war, that we were not fighting each other. It's not a war of Lebanese armed to the teeth in militias mobilized for decades against each other fighting, but it's the Palestinians that brought the war to Lebanon with the PLO. It wasn't the Israelis that expelled Palestinians from their homeland and prevented them from returning and took over Lebanese villages and took over Lebanese land from farmers and all that. That's okay. There's no problem there. That is not something that is to be addressed. But once the Palestinians came and mobilized, that was what still is the dominant hegemonic ideology of what the Lebanese civil war is about. That the war was brought to us, it's the fault of the Palestinians, and then the Syrians, and then the Iranians, and then Hezbollah as a state, and the idea of a state within a state. The PLO was a state within the state. Hezbollah is a state within the state, but they don't say the Association of Banks in Lebanon as a state within a state. For instance, that's the entire structure of the Lebanese state is little fiefdoms of many states fighting each other, basically. But it's easy for them to blame whoever's resisting, rather than whoever is actually responsible for the lack of sanitation, lack of electricity, lack of education, lack of healthcare. These are no problem for the folks that are always talking about state sovereignty. And they're always talking about Hezbollah's arms and not fixing the quality of life.
I just want to add a couple of things to complement quickly, if that's okay. On the ceasefire point, in addition to what the objectives are, this idea of a permanent oscillation between a ceasefire and lack thereof, in addition to this idea of gradual dispossession and grabbing of pieces of land and destruction, it's also a it's a way to say that we determine peace and war. Like, this is a form of domination, that we are the ones, which is, and this is a reflection of the lack of deterrence. So we have to also talk about that. So if this ceasefire mentality continues, this violation mentality of ceasefires continues, in addition to buying the Israelis time to consolidate, whether in Gaza or South Lebanon, their positions, it's also going to eventually lead to one of two things. Either that the other side is going to somehow capitulate, or those who are allied to Israel are going to use this as an excuse to actually strike deals with the Israelis that are capitulatory, or we are going to see the resistance deepen and broaden in a way that creates more high costs for the Israelis and the Americans, at a point where they will realize they cannot initiate. So we're at a point where that's actually somewhere in between, with the Iran entering the war. But it looks like we haven't gotten there, because of the violations that we saw in the last 2 days. And this is also connecting the ceasefire in Lebanon to Iran. There was an idea that the ceasefire in Lebanon was pushed for by the Iranians, which is the case. So that's how the leverage is. But it looks like it didn't go all the way. So the Iranians were willing to somehow compromise to a point because of the pressures they're facing. So this is now a battle. Notice the ceasefire in Lebanon, or truce, we should say, is 10 days. It was purposefully done to not to be out of sync with the 2 weeks. So everybody's fighting to kind of, separate the fronts and connect them. The point about tell on each other, building on the framing that we heard from Nate, the specifics. First, municipalities in Lebanon and the committees like strata, the strata we have in Canada, we have these building committees. They will post like a sign on the elevator saying, if you are hosting somebody, you have to tell us. Some of these posts are not legal. You have to report who is living with you, but they have no right to demand who stays with you. So they put these signs on buildings. They intimidate people if they host someone. Sometimes they even talk to the people going down the stairs. They make them feel uncomfortable. We also have the security forces in Lebanon going to hotels and forcing hotels to create registers in which they have to write the names of everybody who's staying there and constantly coming back. We also have thugs, right-wing thugs in some areas, and people going around with the municipality police. And somehow, even if you don't mind hosting someone and you're from a different sect, they shame you, they publicly shame you. So this is another technique that is used. We also have sometimes inadvertently NGOs who are coming to the relief, the shelters, and they're demanding like detailed information, which is not telling on each other, but it's creating a security hazard for many of the families. And they tell you to leave your phone number if you want aid. Now, most people don't care because they need but this is clearly a form of coercion, in my view. Online, the ministry is demanding online registers. Our problem in Lebanon is double-fold. It's not only the cybersecurity issue, it's the state itself is actually transferring and leaking information to the enemy. So we have a double level of security. The last point, just to add again on Iran, it's let's remember Palestine is an Arab land. I really find it incredible that people, complain about Iran. This is Iran's war when it's about actually the liberation of Palestine, Lebanese Arab territory. So, and in the past it was Nasser. No, it was actually Nasser was described as the Hitler. And Islamism was, Saudi Arabia adopted this idea of Islam. The Shah, Iran's Shah, was a great ally. There was no Shia problem. It was the Nasser Arab nationalist problem. Now it's the Shia problem. So we see the consistency, the fault line is not Shia, Sunni, or Arab and Persian, or Iranian. The fault line is pro-American, pro-imperialist, anti-American, anti-imperialist.
Thank you both for the answers and for that clarity. Few more questions. I'll ask 3, and then we'll go from there. The first one is Gaza is closed off, but not Lebanon or Syria for that matter. Do any of the speakers foresee non-Lebanese, non-Palestinian joining the fight against the Zionist invasion? That's the first question. Second question. Has Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire, to this current ceasefire? Were they even consulted? To what extent will the Lebanese state or the Lebanese government and Israel now turn their attention to try to eliminate or weaken Hezbollah? And a question specifically about Canada and Canada's role. Canadian Prime Minister Carney has called Israel's actions an illegal invasion, but the Canadian government keeps facilitating two-way arms embargo with Israel. How do we cut through the lies and highlight the Canadian government's complicity in what's happening? There are a couple of versions of that same question, but essentially that's the crux of it.
Maybe, Nate, do you want to answer one and I'll answer 2? If Hassan, sorry to step in.
Can you, sorry, yeah, that sounds good. Can you repeat the second question?
The second question is Hezbollah or rather,
That was the one I was
has
suggesting to answer, but go ahead.
okay, the one about has Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire currently? Were they ever consulted? To what extent will the Lebanese state and Israel now turn their attention to eliminate or weaken Hezbollah? That's the second question.
Okay, yeah, I'll take the first question, I suppose, is is it possible that non-Arab, non-Lebanese could could enter Lebanon? It's not and fight against. I mean, I don't really foresee it as likely to happen, but I guess it's up to the future to decide. It's that kind of activity was seen in the Syrian war, actually, where Westerners and leftists in particular went to fights, particularly with the Kurds in Rojava. But we have to think that that was allowed to happen because of the positionality of the Syrian government in this global structure, in which it was the US and the Canada and the UK, especially UK and the West, was trying to overthrow the Syrian regime, not because they're concerned about human rights violations, of which, of course, the regime is guilty of, but because that regime has supported resistance in Palestine. And that regime refused to turn on that matter, which is similar to the Iranian case today. I mean, you can say all you want, and there's valid critiques of what the Syrian regime, the kind of support it did not provide to the resistance in Lebanon, the leftist resistance, for instance. And it was key in intervening in Lebanon to prevent the victory of the Lebanese left in the PLO in the 1970s. That is the case. But after that, it changed position as the Camp David Accords, especially were signed with Egypt, and the Syrian regime could have easily gave up its support for refusing a settlement with the Zionist entity, and could have been welcomed by the West and the Gulf very easily, but they didn't do that. And the same is for Iran. I mean, they could. This is a war about Palestine, as Hicham mentioned, and as Hicham also mentioned, the Shah's Iran was the greatest ally of the United States. It's about politics, not about Islam or not, Islamism or secularism. It's about Iran being committed to this anti-imperialist policy, and that is why they're their target, basically. So I don't really see, although it could be a battle, a lot of international forces going ahead and joining in Lebanon.
In terms of the second question, the situation in Lebanon is as follows. We have multiple actors with some form of sovereignty, although I would argue the Lebanese state has the least sovereignty. But since the delineation of the maritime borders between Palestine and Lebanon, which happened a few years ago, well before the October 7 war, the Hezbollah has taken the position of supporting and pushing for and leveraging the Lebanese position vis-a-vis the Israelis without actually formally engaging with any signing of any deal. So what they do is they let the Lebanese state sign, and generally they push for the best conditions they think should be on that agreement. And if they don't like it, then they simply can say that they don't abide by it. So that gives them actually some freedom of maneuver, which is a very important point about asymmetrical warfare and this ridiculous idea that only the state has the right to resist. As a matter of fact, we see what happens in Arab states. They end up becoming satellite states usually. So in this case, not only did the Hezbollah did not actually sign or participate in this ceasefire, the Lebanese state itself until now has not confirmed. The statement was issued by the White House, the State Department in Washington. And the statement says that both the Lebanese and the Israelis agree to it, are committed to it. So technically, we think that the Lebanese state has committed to it now. And the terms are horrible. The Hezbollah was calling for a truce or ceasefire, wanted it in some respects, I think, in line with the ceasefire of Iran. So this is why they wanted it. They initiated this round of fighting because they were sick and tired, or they felt that the community cannot tolerate constant attacks by the Israelis without response. They started this round and said that this was part of the Iranian war. And then once there's a ceasefire in Iran, there was a call for one in Lebanon. But then when the terms came back from Washington, they mostly opposed the terms, because the terms give Israel the inherent right to self-defense. It doesn't give Lebanon. So these terms are worse than the terms that were agreed to. There's no reference to withdrawal of troops. So the current terms are worse than the terms of November 2024. So now I would say Hezbollah is a bit in a bind. I think, I think they are not sure how to react to this, because the violations are already started. The people went back, but now today, because of the danger, some of them are returning, and there's a bit of a kind of confusion, I would say, politically, on how to stand, what to do next. But I think I haven't followed the latest 2 hours. I think there's a statement that was issued by the Secretary General, but I haven't looked at it. So this is what Hezbollah is doing vis-a-vis, and ultimately, I think, in my view, if the violations continue, they will have to respond, because otherwise they cannot justify this new round of fighting. And also this means basically a major setback. The question is, how will they respond? Will they just conduct small, so-called guerrilla operations, or are they going to launch rockets? And the second important question, how will Iran respond? Iran so far is using the Hormuz Strait. Iran is not attacking Israel. So it's not helping with the military front. And that is actually giving Israel more space to direct most of its military power onto Lebanon. So these are the stakes right now, and we don't know, I think, how this is going to evolve.
Thank you both. I just wanted to add maybe a couple of points with respect to one of the questions in terms of Lebanon being open and potentially for other fighters to join the Zionist invasion. And I don't know if anybody would want to comment on it further, but there were reports that 2 Christian Armenians were martyred in South Lebanon, fighting alongside or as part of the resistance movement led by Hezbollah. And if I remember correctly as well, there were some reports of a Saudi and a Bahraini also that were martyred as part of the resisting the Israeli invasion of South Lebanon. So I don't know if these are signs of potential opening up of the front beyond the resistance in South Lebanon itself. So keep that in mind as you answer the other questions, but we'll take another set of questions.
Hassan, maybe you can address the third question about Canada's role, because I think you're much more in touch on what's happening and the Carney's. I tried, maybe, do you want to address that?
Sure, I guess you're right. We didn't address that.
Sorry, I was acting as a moderator, but I know the audience, somebody asked it, and I know the feeling when you're in the audience and they forget your question. So I wanted to raise it again.
Correct, unless you want to take it, Hicham, yourself.
No, right? I'm happy for you to.
Okay. I mean, generally speaking, and I don't want to take too much time from the other questions that are coming up, Canada's role, unfortunately, when it came to the genocide in Gaza, and right now with what's happening in Lebanon, has been pretty shameful, if I may say so, in the sense that even after the March 2024 motion to stop selling arms directly to Israel, the Canadian government ended up continuing to engage in arms sales to Israel, but they did it through other sources. In other words, indirectly selling to the United States, of having those shipments go to the United States. World Beyond War and Palestinian Youth Movement and other organizations did a lot of work researching exactly how this was happening in 2 separate reports last summer and this past fall. And it was a damning indictment, in my opinion, of the Canadian government's complicity through the sale of weapons and the transfer of weapons to Israel. So the Prime Minister, current Prime Minister and the previous Prime Minister can say that the invasion is illegal, They can express concern about the targeting of civilians in Lebanon or in Gaza. But unless they specifically take measures to stop the flow of weapons to Israel, or to impose sanctions on Israel, or to cancel the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, it is all worse than lip service. It is engaging in deception, in my opinion. And as part of the work that we do in Labor for Palestine, along with our partners, is to point out that kind of deception and the complicity that the state of the Canadian state continues to engage in. That is on that question, and we do have a number of other questions that I'd like to quickly go through. One is in relation to, I lost where I was, sources of reliable news coming out of Lebanon. If anybody can suggest, because I personally can tell you that the Canadian news outlets are completely biased and follow the Zionist and the imperialist US narrative on this. So if you can suggest sources of news outlets, that would be great. Question 2, what indicators do we have that China will be even a remote ally to anti-imperialist struggles in general, and the Palestine/Lebanon question in particular? So let's take these two questions, and then if we have more time, we'll take a couple more.
Would you like to go first, Hisham, on this?
Do you have a preference, Nate, which one you'd like to address?
You can go on Lebanese media, especially, I think.
Okay, sure. Generally speaking, of course, this question of reliable sources is difficult to answer. And especially if you don't read Arabic. Not that Arabic sources are necessarily reliable, but we do have a good number of sources that publish in Arabic, much more so in English, perhaps, at least from where I stand. So I think, I mean, I can suggest a couple of, here's the point. I personally, by the way, I do not get my news from a single source. So I watch Al Jazeera for 10 minutes, then I watch Al Mayadeen for 5 minutes, or 10 or 15. So I don't listen to one source, because I really honestly, most of them, even if they align with my politics, we do have a certain level of propaganda, and I say propaganda both in the positive and negative sense, that sometimes is obscuring our ability to understand the facts on the ground. And this is typical of the fog of war. So my first advice is don't rely on a single source. My second advice is distinguish between trying to get facts on the ground. If you're trying to get facts on the ground, my advice is go to Telegram and join. There's so many English sources by the what is called the war media of the warring parties. So we, of course, all the media does a free job of advertising the Israeli army spokesperson. But we have spokespeople for the resistance forces that are issuing constantly information about the battle. So go to Telegram and think about how to join these channels. So that's in terms of facts on the ground. There are some reasonable sources. Also depends on if you're talking about the Iran war or Lebanon, because, for example, Qatari media can be sometimes very good on what's happening in Palestine, somewhat on Lebanon, and maybe not somewhat on Iran. And also Qatari media itself, the Middle East, I would be a much better source possibly than, for example, if you look at the New Arab, in my opinion. So honestly, these are, in Lebanon, Al Akhbar English is a good source for a counter argument. So it's a major news source that's present. Those are the things, and I just fishing through social media, but unfortunately, I don't think there's a single place you can go to get everything and learn about everything.
I agree with that. Thank you, Hisham. I would just, yes, definitely have to follow, X is also quite good, or Twitter, but you have to find the right voices to follow, or, know that you follow your enemies or your adversaries and as well, and you have to learn how to decode them. But you can get information out of that, as he said. And I would just add that a couple good Lebanese sites that have English sources, English sides to them. In addition to Al Akhbar, there's the public source has good articles in English. This is more analysis though, rather than news like day-to-day facts on the ground, like the facts. Legal Agenda as well also publishes useful articles in English as well that will talk about like the condition of particular regions or the legal rights that are there, different legal causes like censorship and things like that. Other than that, like watch all the networks or subscribe to all the networks like breaking news feeds. Many of them are in English as well. Mayadeen and Al Jazeera have good English news coming out, for instance. And for the second question about China, it's far from my expertise, but I would just say that the very existence of a counterweight to American domination is incredibly important and is in the background. And it's obviously China is taking a very cautious role. We don't really know what it's doing, the extent of its relationship with Iran right now. We know there is one. Iran is important. China is important for Iran for selling the oil. That's all of it is going basically there. But from China's side, Iranian oil is just a drop in the bucket. So structurally, it's not going to be bending over backwards either. But it is, as it seems to be that they're providing them with intelligence, their satellite networks, they're giving them some kind of access to military assets that could prove to become more important as we go along too. We don't know what Iran has. Land borders that are extensive and things can be coming in and out of it. The ability for Iran to have shot down those American airplanes is coming from, I'm not sure where the technology came from, if that's Chinese or Russian or homegrown, but the Chinese inputs, the Russian inputs are playing an important role in balancing the power, and we'll have to see how it develops. I don't think that they're going to, they have an interest in seeing the U.S. hegemony crumble as well. So I think we'll have to keep an eye on it, but you should keep your expectations low, I guess.
Thank you both for excellent presentations and thorough and well-informed responses. This has been great, and it's always an honor of us to have you with us today. We've reached the end of our time. Thank you, of course, to the folks who attended the webinar for their excellent and well-informed also questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't get to a lot of them that were really excellent. On the question of the sources and media outlets that are reliable, when we send our follow-up email, we will include, of course, a link to the recorded presentation that we will post on our YouTube channel, but we will also include some of the resources that you've suggested for us. And so folks will have them and will be able to use them. Of course, as part of this presentation and all the information you've given, specifically the question in relation to Canada's complicity, is that we believe in Labor for Palestine that there is an urgent need to stop the flow of arms to Israel now. And that's why we have what we call the Hot Cargo Kills campaign, No Labor for Genocide, which is calling on the Canadian Labour Congress to declare Israeli goods and services, including relationships, hot cargo, because hot cargo, from our perspective, is not only about military goods. And that's why we're also calling on the Canadian labor movement generally to break its relationship with the Histadrut, the so-called labor center in Israel, which has been complicit and part of the Zionist colonization project of Palestine going back to the mid-1920s. For trade union members who are part of this group today who have joined us, of course, a quick reminder that we have the hot cargo resolution that is going to the Canadian Labour Congress. It's been submitted by a number of national unions, labor councils, as well as locals. And it will be hitting the floor at the convention, which is taking place from May 11th to May 15th in Winnipeg. And Labor for Palestine, of course, has union caucuses and chapters right across the country. If you're not connected to any of them, please reach out to us, send us an email, and we'll make sure you're connected and you're participating and engaged with the work that we are doing on the ground in these chapters and caucuses right across the country. And of course, stay tuned for more webinars and excellent speakers like Hicham and Nate, who will be joining us in the future to tackle one or the other of the questions that are burning questions that people are wanting to know more about in relation to the struggle of the liberation of the Palestinian people and all the people of the world, but in particular those who are in West Asia that are facing Israeli Zionism and the worst of U.S. capitalism and imperialism is offering. Once again, Hicham, thank you so much. Stay safe in Lebanon. Nate, thank you again to both of you for joining us on such a short notice. We didn't give you so much time, but we're grateful that you were able to join us today. And thank you all for being part of the webinar, Free Palestine, Free Lebanon, and the occupation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us as well. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all in attendance and your great questions. And best of luck organizing in Canada.
Thank you.